A successful black billionaire woman faces blatant discrimination by both a flight attendant and a pilot during a routine flight. But within minutes, they realize their actions have unleashed devastating consequences. What unfolds next is a journey of justice, transformation, and redemption that will change their lives forever. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you're inspired by tales of resilience and justice, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an uplifting story that sparks change. Late one afternoon, Victoria Carter, a black billionaire in her late 60s, stepped into the first-class cabin of a commercial flight. Dressed in an elegant gray coat, tailored trousers, and carrying a small handbag, she looked like an ordinary passenger, showing none of the opulence one might expect from someone who owned a sprawling business empire. But this was Victoria's essence: humility and simplicity. Victoria had spent her day attending critical meetings and signing off on a major charitable project aimed at bringing clean water to impoverished regions worldwide. Her mind was still preoccupied with numbers and future plans as she boarded the plane. But when she found her seat by the window, she took a deep breath, relishing the comfort of first class. The sky outside was a brilliant blue, a gentle reminder that beyond the turbulence of life, moments of peace for reflection still existed. As Victoria placed her bag in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat, a few curious glances from other passengers swept over her. She paid them no mind. It wasn't the first time she felt those looks, a mix of surprise and skepticism. Yet, over the years, she had learned to brush off such judgments. Another long flight, she thought, pulling a thin blanket over her legs, intending to spend the time reading and reflecting on her future plans. Little did she know, this flight would not go as smoothly as she hoped. A new challenge awaited her, one that would force her to confront something she had spent her entire life battling: discrimination. Victoria had just opened her small leather-bound book to immerse herself in a few pages of text after a long day when a voice rang out beside her, sharp and full of suspicion. "Ma'am, it seems you're in the wrong seat. I believe your seat isn't here." Victoria looked up, meeting the gaze of Bethany, a flight attendant with a polished appearance, perfectly styled hair in a high bun, a crisp, unwrinkled uniform, and a checklist in hand. But instead of the usual polite smile typical of first-class attendants, Bethany's eyes scanned Victoria with blatant scrutiny and disdain. "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, her tone calm but her gaze cautious. "I need to see your ticket," Bethany replied, leaning forward, her eyes fixed on Victoria, as if hoping to uncover a reason to challenge her presence. Not wanting to escalate the situation, Victoria gently reached into her small handbag, retrieved her ticket, and handed it to Bethany. Bethany took it, but instead of a quick glance as she did with other passengers, she examined it thoroughly, flipping it over and even, entering the code into her scanner. She frowned, her lips pressed tightly together, clearly searching for a mistake. Bethany's actions didn't go unnoticed by the surrounding passengers. A middle-aged man in a suit who had been reading a magazine glanced up with a frown. A young woman seated nearby cast a concerned look toward Victoria and shook her head slightly, as if to warn her that this was far from normal. After several seconds of scrutiny, Bethany returned the ticket, but not with the usual courtesy. She placed it on the table in front of Victoria, her expression stern. "This is indeed your seat, but—" She paused, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "This seat doesn't seem suitable for you." Her words froze the air in the first-class cabin. Victoria paused for a moment, her composed gaze turning icy. In that instant, she felt a familiar sting, being judged and humiliated for simply being herself. It had happened countless times throughout her life, yet it never ceased to leave a mark. Victoria's tone remained steady, but her words rang out with the clarity of a bell. "What exactly do you mean by not suitable? I paid for this seat just like every other. Passenger, I have every right to sit here." Bethany, instead of backing down, raised an eyebrow, appearing surprised that someone like Victoria would dare to push back. She made no effort to hide her annoyance. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. First-class seating comes with high service standards, and I need to ensure everything is in order. If you feel offended, I sincerely apologize, but I have a job to do." Bethany's evasive response was no different from an implicit insult. Victoria could feel anger bubbling up, but she knew that reacting rashly would only add fuel to the fire. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hands firmly on the table, her gaze unwavering as she replied in a low but commanding voice, "Your job is not to decide who deserves to sit here, but to serve the passengers. I think it's clear who doesn't belong in this situation." Bethany faltered for a moment. Her initial confidence began to waver as she faced Victoria's sharp gaze and unyielding demeanor. Still, rather than backing down, she grew flustered and chose to escalate the situation. She spun on her heel, striding briskly toward the galley, and returned a few minutes later with an even more determined expression. "If you continue to cause trouble, I'll have no choice but to inform the captain," she said, this time trying to project seriousness and authority. Victoria held her ground, a faint smile playing on her lips, but her expression showed no sign of concession. "Do what you think is necessary. I'll be waiting right here." Not long after Bethany left, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had yet to return to normal. A few passengers, intrigued and puzzled, exchanged glances. Victoria, though, seated calmly and maintaining her composure, felt a deep sense of injustice boiling within. This wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, but each instance felt like a fresh wound cutting deeper into old scars. The sound of footsteps echoed from the front of the plane. Captain William, a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform with an authoritative stride, appeared at the entrance to the first-class cabin. With his graying hair and sharp features, he exuded the aura of someone accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. Bethany quickly approached him and began explaining the situation, her voice deliberately lowered so that other passengers wouldn't overhear. "Captain, this passenger, she's being uncooperative. I've checked her ticket, and it's valid for this seat, but I don't think she fully understands the rules of the first-class cabin. I need your assistance to handle this." William listened to Bethany without glancing at Victoria. His eyes held a judgmental look, as if he'd already made up his mind based solely on the flight attendant's account. He stepped closer to Victoria, his voice calm but cold. "Ma'am, we don't want to disturb you, but if you refuse to cooperate and follow the instructions of the flight crew, I will have to ask you to leave the plane." Victoria slowly raised her head, meeting William's gaze directly. For a moment, no one in the cabin spoke. Her eyes did not show anger, but a cold, deliberate calm, as though weighing every word he had said. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp but measured. "Cooperate? What have I done that is uncooperative? I'm sitting in my assigned seat. I haven't caused any disruption. In fact, I've remained silent despite being insulted. So, tell me, on what grounds do you intend to remove me from this plane?" William hesitated, caught off guard by the precision of her response, but he quickly regained his composure. His tone grew more authoritative. "You are disrupting the environment in the first-class cabin. I need all passengers here to feel comfortable. If you do not comply with the regulations, we will have to ask you to leave." "Comfortable?" Victoria smirked, her tone dripping with irony. "It seems comfort here is reserved for those who don't want to see someone like me sitting in this cabin." Her words drew the attention of nearby passengers, some looking puzzled, others contemplative. William, unaccustomed to being challenged, frowned. Turning to Bethany, he asked, "Is there an issue with her ticket?" Bethany promptly replied, "No, Captain. The ticket is valid, but I just feel that—" She hesitated, avoiding Victoria's gaze. "She doesn't seem suited for this environment." William turned back to Victoria, his voice now laden with an oppressive authority. "You have two options. Leave peacefully, or we will involve security." The threat hung heavy in the already tense air. Other passengers were now fully attentive, some whispering to each other, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Victoria took a deep breath and stood up, her gaze never wavering from William's. Her voice was steady, each word deliberate and unyielding. "Captain, I'm not accustomed to being threatened. You may call whoever you wish. But before you do, remember that your actions today will not just affect me, they will reflect on the entire system you represent." William faltered slightly, but quickly regained his resolve. In an impulsive move, he raised his hand and struck Victoria across the face. "That's enough," William shouted, his voice booming through the cabin. The slap left everyone stunned. Some passengers gaped in shock, while others averted their eyes, unable to witness the scene. Victoria staggered slightly, but quickly steadied herself. She touched her cheek, where the redness was already visible, yet her gaze remained unwavering. In a clear, unwavering voice, Victoria looked directly at William and said, "I will leave, but remember this. That slap is not the end. It is the beginning, and you, along with this flight attendant, will face the consequences of your actions." She bent down to pick up her bag, maintaining her upright posture as she walked away under the stunned stares of the passengers. Some lowered their heads in shame, while others watched her with newfound respect. As she passed a young passenger, the woman whispered, "They don't know who you are, but I think they just made a terrible mistake." Victoria didn't respond. She kept walking, each step echoing a silent declaration that she would not let this injustice go unanswered. In her heart, a plan was already forming. She knew this wasn't just her story. It was part of a larger fight for justice, one she had been waging her entire life. Victoria stepped out of the first-class cabin with calm, measured steps, but her eyes burned with a simmering fire. The cool air in the airport corridor did little to soothe the sting on her cheek, not just from William's slap, but also from the blatant, prejudiced humiliation she had just endured. This wasn't the first time Victoria faced injustice, but she knew this time wouldn't be dismissed as just another incident. Walking into the VIP lounge, where soft lighting illuminated the plush leather chairs, Victoria found a secluded corner and sat down. She reached into her small handbag, pulled out her phone, and dialed Linda Gray, her senior assistant of over 2 decades. "Linda," she began, her voice steady and firm, betraying no emotion, "call the entire legal and internal management teams. I want everyone present for an emergency meeting as soon as I land." Linda, on the other end of the line, immediately sensed the gravity in her boss's tone. "What happened, Mrs. Carter?" she asked, concerned. Victoria took a deep breath, keeping her voice sharp and composed. "I was just publicly assaulted and discriminated against on the flight. The captain slapped me, and the crew displayed blatant prejudice throughout. I want an investigation launched immediately." Linda paused for a moment before replying decisively, "Understood. I'll prepare everything. We'll handle this carefully." Victoria ended the call, her hands still gripping the phone tightly. She looked out of the large lounge window where planes were lining up for takeoff. Her mind raced, forming every detail of her plan. This wasn't just about her. This was an opportunity to create real change, not just within her company but across the industry. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, the passengers were still silent after the incident. Some kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact with Bethany, the flight attendant who was pacing the aisle as if trying to suppress attention. But one person couldn't remain quiet. Samantha Rivers, a young journalist, had recorded the entire ordeal on her phone. Her hands trembled as she opened a social media app and quickly typed a post. On this flight, an elderly passenger was publicly slapped by the captain just for sitting in first class. Is this how they treat people? Absolutely disgraceful. Discrimination, injustice. The post, accompanied by the video, went live and quickly went viral, amassing thousands of shares within hours. Comments flooded in. "This is horrific. How can they do this to an elderly passenger? First-class tickets aren't reserved for just one kind of person. This is blatant discrimination. Someone get that woman the justice she deserves." What Samantha didn't know was that the woman in her video wasn't just any passenger. She was Victoria Carter, a billionaire and the owner of the airline they were flying on. And this story wouldn't end with a few social media posts. At the airline's headquarters, senior executives were alerted to the incident through reports from the flight crew. An emergency meeting was immediately convened. On a large screen in the boardroom, Victoria Carter's face appeared from her remote location, her eyes cold and determined, a stark contrast to the weariness she had just endured. She sat upright, speaking slowly but with undeniable authority. "We are facing more than just a behavioral issue. This is a systemic failure in our company's culture. This incident doesn't just affect me personally. It strikes at the heart of the values and image we stand for." One senior executive tried to justify the situation. "Mrs. Carter, perhaps this is an isolated incident. We can deal with the crew privately to minimize the impact on the company's reputation." Victoria leaned forward, her gaze piercing the man speaking. "Don't make excuses. This is not the first time. I've reviewed the complaint records. Do you think I don't know how many similar incidents have been swept under the rug or handled superficially? This is not an isolated event. It's a symptom of a system that is rotting from within." Her directives were clear. 1. Immediate suspension of William and Bethany. An investigation would determine their fate in the company. 2. Launch a comprehensive reform plan. Victoria demanded mandatory cultural sensitivity and anti-discrimination training for all employees, from flight attendants to senior executives. 3. Overhaul the complaint system. Every grievance must be addressed transparently, with specific actions taken. "We are not just correcting a mistake," she stated firmly. "We are rebuilding a culture. If we fail to do that, you won't just lose me. You'll lose the trust of our customers." The meeting ended in silence. The executives left with tense expressions, while Victoria remained seated, her eyes fixed on the blank screen. Inside her, resolve burned brighter. She knew this was just the beginning of a long battle, but she was ready to fight. Back in the airport lounge, Victoria gazed outside at the planes taking off and landing. She whispered to herself, like a declaration, "They think they know who I am. They have no idea I'm the one who will change this entire system." Victoria returned to the airline's headquarters on a gray afternoon. The cool air from the large glass meeting room surrounded her, but inside emotions were surging. She stepped into the meeting room where the senior leadership team, legal representatives, and communication officers were already waiting. All eyes turned to the powerful woman, but no one dared to speak. She sat at the central position, her piercing gaze sweeping across the room. They could feel the gravity in every step she took. "We are facing a major crisis," she began, her voice deep and resonant. "But this crisis isn't just about the individual behavior of a few employees. It's the result of a system that has tolerated injustice for far too long. And today, everything will change." The large screen lit up, displaying a detailed report prepared by the legal team. A voice from the investigative group began explaining. Complaint records over the past 2 years show that more than 40% of discrimination allegations came from passengers belonging to minority groups. Many complaints were ignored or handled superficially. In some cases, employees were not investigated despite receiving multiple negative reports from passengers. Images of complaints appeared on the screen, each line exposing harsh truths. Some leaders lowered their heads to avoid Victoria's gaze, while others shifted uncomfortably, quietly taking notes. As for the 2 employees directly involved in the incident, the voice continued, Captain William had previous complaints about his domineering attitude, but due to his long-standing record of service, these complaints were overlooked. Bethany, the flight attendant, had also received multiple complaints about unprofessional conduct, but no disciplinary action was taken. Victoria sat silently, her gaze sharp as a blade. When the report concluded, she placed her hands on the table, her voice breaking the suffocating silence. "This is how you run the system? Turning a blind eye to mistakes, ignoring the voices of passengers, and perpetuating an environment where injustice thrives openly?" A senior director tried to speak, his tone defensive. "Ms. Carter, we take full responsibility for these oversights, but I believe your case is an exceptional one. Perhaps we shouldn't let it impact the entire system." Victoria turned to him, her piercing gaze cutting through. "Exceptional? You call the injustice I faced exceptional? Do you truly think this is the first time something like this has happened? No, it's not the first, and if we don't act, it won't be the last. I'm not here just for myself. I'm here to ensure that everyone who has been hurt without a voice will finally be heard." The room fell into silence. No one dared to utter another word. "Starting today," she continued, her tone firm and commanding, "we will implement comprehensive changes. I want every employee, from flight attendants to leadership, to undergo cultural awareness training and learn how to treat all passengers with fairness. Every complaint must be handled transparently and publicly. And if anyone in this room feels they can't adapt, I suggest they vacate their position now." Nervous glances were exchanged. Victoria's words were not a suggestion, they were orders. As the meeting ended, Victoria requested a private meeting with William and Bethany. They were led into a small room where she was already waiting. Bethany kept her head down, unable to meet her eyes, while William tried to maintain a confident demeanor, though his gaze lacked its usual firmness. Victoria began speaking, her tone cold and deliberate. "I don't think I need to recount how you both behaved, but let me ask you this. Do you think you have the right to judge the worth of others? Do you think you have the authority to decide who does or doesn't deserve respect?" William looked up, responding defensively. "Ms. Carter, I only did what I thought was right to maintain order." Victoria cut him off, her eyes flashing with anger. "Order? You maintained order by slapping a passenger in front of the entire first-class cabin? Do you think that's how a captain should behave?" William fell silent, his gaze dropping. She turned to Bethany, who was already in tears. "And you? You thought I didn't belong in first class because of how I looked, didn't you? You looked at me and decided I didn't fit the image of a customer you wanted to serve. Isn't that right?" Bethany choked out her response. I didn't realize. I didn't mean to." Victoria leaned forward, her voice sharp as a knife. "That's exactly the problem. You didn't realize, because you've never had to face it. But today, you will understand what it feels like." Bethany bowed her head, tears streaming down her face. The smugness in her eyes was completely gone. Victoria stood, her gaze sweeping over both of them. "I'm not here to destroy your careers. I'm here to teach you a lesson you'll never forget. And if you fail to learn it, don't expect to return to this company." As William and Bethany left the room, Victoria remained behind. She didn't feel satisfied or relieved, but she knew this was just the beginning. She looked out the window, where the golden light of the late afternoon bathed the planes lined up for takeoff. A fierce determination burned within her. This wasn't just about reclaiming justice for herself. This was a fight to change an entire system. And Victoria Carter, as always, was ready for battle. In the days following the meeting, the airline's headquarters entered a state of urgent activity. Every department worked tirelessly to implement the reforms Victoria Carter had ordered. Cultural awareness and anti-discrimination training programs were swiftly but comprehensively designed, becoming mandatory for all employees, from flight attendants and pilots to senior management. The training sessions began with seriousness and intensity. Practical exercises required employees not only to learn the rules, but also to put themselves in the passenger's shoes. In one exercise, Bethany was assigned the role of an elderly passenger who was constantly ignored and treated coldly by the service staff. When she sought assistance, the employees responded curtly or ignored her. When the exercise ended, Bethany sat silently, her eyes brimming with tears. She turned to the instructor and said, her voice trembling, "I felt invisible, as if I didn't exist." That feeling led her to deeply understand the pain passengers had endured. William was not spared the hands-on lessons either. In another exercise, he played the role of a person of color unfairly suspected of wrongdoing. As he tried to explain himself, the suspicious looks and cold demeanor of the employees left him feeling insulted. After the exercise, William sat quietly for a long time before saying, "I felt powerless. It was nothing like the respect I always assumed I deserved." These lessons began to shift their perspectives. Bethany started attending the training sessions with a new attitude. After one session, she approached the instructor and said, "I always thought I was following the right procedures. But now I understand it's not just about doing things right, but doing them with empathy and respect." William, once proud of his authority and experience, also reflected on his actions. One morning, he walked into Victoria's office, his eyes sincere, and said, "I want to apologize for my behavior. I used to think strength was about control, but now I see true strength is about understanding. If given the chance, I want to help share this lesson with younger pilots." Victoria looked at him, her expression a blend of sternness and warmth. She replied, "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step. I hope you'll turn this lesson into meaningful action, not just in your work, but in how you live." These changes were not limited to Bethany and William. Other employees began to feel the impact of the training sessions as well. A young flight attendant, after completing the program, told a colleague, "I used to think my job was just serving food and ensuring safety. Now I understand that we also have a responsibility to foster respect for every passenger." A new wave began to sweep through the company. Feedback from passengers grew increasingly positive, and the number of complaints dropped significantly. In an internal report, a passenger of color wrote an email stating, "For the first time in years, I felt treated as a person, not a problem to solve. Thank you for making this change." Victoria held the report in her hands, her eyes reflecting pride mixed with determination. She stepped to the office window, where sunlight illuminated the planes taking off. Looking out at the vast sky, she thought to herself, "Major change always starts with small steps, but if taken in the right direction, every step matters." Victoria Carter entered a new day with a resolute spirit. Her airline was undergoing profound reform, yet public pressure showed no signs of easing. The video of the incident on the flight had spread rapidly across social media. Debates erupted everywhere, from condemning the crew's actions to questioning whether the situation had been exaggerated. The mounting pressure was relentless, but Victoria understood that this was also an opportunity to drive change. On social media platforms, comments and posts continued to draw attention. An anonymous post by an airline employee intensified the situation. "This incident wasn't an accident. Our internal culture has tolerated such behavior for years. This is an opportunity for change." Reading these words, Victoria remained undeterred. She knew that changing a system required patience and determination. In the following weeks, Victoria's initiatives began to take shape. The complaint system was redesigned, allowing passengers and employees to report any misconduct through an anonymous hotline. These reports were handled transparently, with clear outcomes. Additionally, every employee, from flight attendants to pilots, underwent rigorous evaluations of their service attitudes. Those who failed to meet the standards were required to participate in mandatory improvement programs. The airline also prioritized recruiting personnel from diverse cultural backgrounds and organized training sessions to help employees gain a deeper understanding of respect and diversity. A new leadership program was launched, focusing on training employees with potential to become leaders who embody fairness and empathy. A month later, Victoria convened an online meeting with all employees. For the first time, she spoke publicly about the incident and the changes she was implementing. She began her speech with a strong but emotional tone. "Last month, I experienced one of the most painful moments of my career. But I'm not here to talk about that pain. I'm here to talk about hope. The hope that we can become a company every employee is proud of and every passenger feels respected by." She emphasized that the changes were not just about correcting past mistakes, but shaping the future. Every member of the team had a crucial role in building a culture of fairness and respect. Her words were met with agreement and applause from employees, even those who had initially doubted the reforms. Victoria's changes began to yield results. Feedback from passengers became increasingly positive. A passenger who had been on the fateful flight wrote her a thank you letter saying, "I didn't know who you were at the time, but I want to thank you for not staying silent. What you're doing isn't just for yourself, but for all of us." Bethany, after her training, was assigned to lead sessions for new employees. She used her own story as a lesson on the impact of unconscious bias and how it can hurt others. William, after proving his transformation, proposed forming a support group for young pilots to learn communication and handle sensitive situations. Both chose to turn their mistakes into lessons for others. Months later, as Victoria reviewed a report on the reform's outcomes, she saw a clear transformation. Complaints had significantly decreased, while passenger satisfaction reached the highest level in the company's history. Her efforts were bearing fruit. At a leadership meeting, one executive admitted, "I used to think these changes would cause disruption, but now I have to say they're the best thing we've ever done." That evening, Victoria sat alone in her office. Outside, planes lined up to take off into the sky. She smiled, feeling proud but not complacent. She knew reform was an ongoing journey, but in that moment, she understood she was on the right path. The lights from the airport reflected in the window, a reminder that even in darkness, persistence can create something extraordinary. With the reform efforts already in motion, Victoria felt acutely aware that, despite the significant progress made, the journey she and the company needed to undertake was far from over. In the following months, the changes she initiated began to yield tangible results, but it was essential to sustain and expand upon the values she had built. The initial improvements were just the beginning. This was a continuous process to solidify and amplify these transformations. One morning, Victoria sat in a meeting room with the airline's leadership team. While much had changed, she knew that sustaining these changes required one more critical step. Not only altering the way the company operated, but also transforming the mindset of every individual within it. "We've made significant changes," she began, her voice firm and filled with determination. "But if we don't change the way we think about each other, all these reforms will only be surface level. What truly matters is that we change how we view others, and, more importantly, how we view ourselves." She emphasized that cultural and respect-based training programs were not merely tools to modify behavior, but the foundation for creating a new culture, one where everyone is treated with respect, regardless of their background or position. In the subsequent months, she directed all departments to continue implementing new initiatives. One notable effort was the expansion of cultural awareness training programs, which now included not only current employees but also all new hires. Every new employee was required to attend a 2-week course that provided a deep understanding of the company's values and the cultural environment Victoria aimed to foster. Additionally, the complaint system was upgraded to ensure that every passenger felt they could voice concerns about unfair treatment without fear of retaliation. A dedicated app was developed, enabling passengers to easily report any issues they encountered during their flights, with all reports being addressed as quickly as possible. A key part of Victoria's long-term plan was to establish a continuous feedback system from customers. This feedback would not only help improve services, but also accurately reflect the changes in employee behavior and attitudes. Every month, employees received customer evaluations. Those with outstanding performance were rewarded, while those falling short of standards were required to attend additional training sessions. Bethany and William, having completed their training and acknowledged their past mistakes, became role models for cultural transformation within the company. Bethany, after recovering from the shock of her own actions, began mentoring young flight attendants on the importance of treating every passenger with fairness and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. She often shared her personal story, how she once discriminated against Victoria, and how that experience profoundly changed her. William, who once believed in the power of authority and control above all, became a leader in pilot training programs. He shared his journey of recognizing his mistakes in dealing with passengers and encouraged young pilots to always approach their work with respect and patience. William felt that his transformation not only reshaped his own career, but also contributed to the systemic change within the company. With these new initiatives in place, passengers began to notice a marked difference. Flights not only ran more smoothly, but were also filled with a sense of respect and friendliness. A passenger named Emily shared on social media, "For the first time in years, I felt like I was treated as someone important. There was no discrimination or disrespect. Thank you, airline, for changing." An internal report from the customer service department showed a significant drop in complaints. At the same time, customer retention rates and the number of recommendations from satisfied passengers increased. This not only demonstrated the success of the reform programs, but also proved that respect and dedicated service were key to building customer loyalty. Despite these initial successes, Victoria did not rest. She knew that reform was an ongoing process and that a company's culture could not be changed overnight. To maintain and build upon the values she had established, she decided to closely monitor the training programs, create more opportunities for employees to connect and learn from one another, and reinforce awareness of fairness in both work and life. One morning, sitting in her office and looking out the window, Victoria smiled as she watched planes take off. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but with the values firmly rooted in the hearts of every employee, she believed her company could become a shining example of respect and fairness in the aviation industry. "We can't change the world in a day," she thought to herself, "but every small action we take can make a big difference, and today we've started making that change." Victoria Carter stepped into the headquarters of the airline, where the workplace atmosphere seemed more vibrant than ever. Brightly lit hallways, employees greeting each other with smiles, and uplifting stories of customer experiences filled the reports. Victoria could feel that the changes she and her team had worked tirelessly to implement were finally taking root, not just as surface actions but as core elements of the company culture. In the large conference room, directors, senior managers, and some exemplary employees gathered for a meeting to review the results of the reforms. Victoria walked up to the podium, her gaze calm yet filled with pride, scanning the faces of those who had journeyed through these challenges with her. "We began this journey at one of the toughest times," she began. "But in the face of challenges, we discovered the strength to change. Today, I don't just want to talk about what we've achieved, but I want to express my gratitude to each one of you, those who worked tirelessly to turn our vision into reality." The large screen displayed positive metrics. Complaints had dropped by over 60%, passenger satisfaction reached its highest levels in history, and there were hundreds of thank you notes from customers worldwide. Some of these notes were read aloud, including one from an elderly passenger who once feared flying, but now felt welcomed as part of a family. After the numbers were presented, Bethany took the stage. It was her first time sharing her story in front of the entire company. Her voice trembled, but her eyes sparkled with determination. "I used to think I was a good flight attendant, But it was my mistake that taught me being technically good isn't enough. I needed to be a better human. I learned that a smile, a non-judgmental glance, can transform someone else's experience. I'm grateful for the chance to make amends and be part of this journey of change." The room erupted into applause, not just for Bethany, but for everyone who had contributed to the transformation. Victoria listened to every word, every story, but she didn't settle for satisfaction. She knew that these changes needed to be sustained and continuously improved. After the meeting, she convened senior leaders to emphasize that their mission wasn't over. Reform is not a destination, it's a journey. We cannot rest on our initial successes. We must strive to become the best version of ourselves, she said. She called for ongoing improvement in training programs, expansion of customer feedback systems, and, most importantly, ensuring core values such as respect, fairness, and empathy were reflected in every employee's actions. A few weeks later, Victoria boarded a routine flight, but this time she didn't inform anyone on the crew. As she stepped onto the plane, the flight attendants greeted her warmly, unaware that this unassuming woman was their CEO. A young attendant carefully showed her how to use the seat and blanket, constantly checking if she needed anything else. Throughout the flight, Victoria observed the crew's work. Their attentive care and courteous demeanor made her smile. This was the image she had always envisioned, an airline where every passenger, no matter who they were, was treated with utmost respect. As the plane landed, Victoria leaned in and whispered to the attendant who had assisted her, "You've done a wonderful job. I'm very proud of you." The attendant, surprised but smiling, replied, "Thank you. This is a job I truly love." One afternoon, Victoria sat in her office gazing out at the sky where planes bearing the airline's logo soared one after another. Sunlight streamed through the window, reflecting off her desk. Inside, she felt pride but not complacency. The path she chose had not been easy, but the results proved that every effort was worth it. "We can't change everything in a single day," she thought, "but each small step, taken in the right direction, leads to a better world." Victoria picked up her pen and wrote the final lines in her reform report. "This is not the end. This is just the beginning of a new vision, a place where every passenger is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. And this journey, I believe, will never stop." She set down her pen, smiling. The vast sky outside remained limitless, and Victoria knew that she and her airline would continue to soar, carrying the values she had painstakingly built. Victoria Carter proved that even in moments of pain and injustice, one can transform hardship into motivation, creating meaningful change. Her story is not just about reclaiming personal justice, but serves as a powerful reminder that each of us holds the power to change systems, provided we have the courage and perseverance to face challenges. She didn't choose revenge, she chose to rebuild, with humanity, compassion, and determination. Through this, she brought justice not just for herself, but for millions of others. Victoria's story calls on us to treat one another with respect, empathy, and fairness, no matter who they are or where they come from. These values don't just transform a company, they can transform a society. Remember, every small action you take can create a better world. If you feel inspired by this story and wish to receive more meaningful content, subscribe to our channel. Together, we can spread positive values and contribute to building a world where fairness and kindness are at the core.